Hey, movie nerds! Today we're stepping into Thelma and Louise, 1991. A road movie turned cultural landmark, a drama-thriller hybrid that explores freedom, rebellion, and the cost of defiance. A story that asks us to look deeper, to question, and to feel beyond the surface. I'm glad you're here, because together we'll unravel the hidden layers, the subtle details, and the little moments that whisper the heart of the film. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. Let's keep exploring these stories that shape how we see the world. Now, settle in, open your mind, and let's dive into the depths of this cinematic journey. From the first frames, there is a restlessness humming underneath. The film opens with quiet lives, women who have been bent under the weight of expectation and routine. One is trapped in the monotony of a marriage that suffocates her spirit, where every gesture feels ignored, every dream dismissed. The other wears her independence like a shield, hardened by life's disappointments but unwilling to show the fractures underneath. Their friendship feels like sanctuary, a bond that defies the narrow definitions placed on them by the world around them. Yet even in their laughter, you sense the pull of something larger. The story promises not only a road trip but a reckoning, not just a drive across highways but a collision with patriarchy, violence, and the yearning for autonomy. The overview of this journey is deceptively simple. Two women set out for a weekend getaway, hoping for respite from lives that have worn them thin. But almost immediately, what begins as escape is transformed by violence. An attempted assault erupts into tragedy, and in that split second of defiance, the course of their lives is irreversibly altered. From then on, the open road is no longer a playground but battlefield, every mile a gamble between liberation and capture. What makes the story remarkable is not only its tension but its tenderness, the way it reveals character through small gestures, the way it treats rebellion not as an abstraction but as necessity, the way it turns landscape itself into symbol of desire and doom. The plot unfolds like a slow burn that accelerates without mercy. The two women embark in high spirits, laughing in their convertible, the wind in their hair, the road stretching endlessly. They flirt with freedom, stopping at bars, talking about love and disappointment. But then comes the encounter that changes everything, a predator who mistakes their joy for permission. When the moment explodes into violence, and a gunshot slices the night, their path is forever altered. The scene is shocking not only for its brutality but for its honesty, the way it refuses to soften the stakes. From that point on, they are fugitives, their friendship carrying them forward as they outrun not only the law but the lives they no longer want to return to. As their journey deepens, so too does the story's energy. The car becomes a moving fortress, carrying their laughter, their tears, their whispered confessions. They encounter men who exploit, betray, or underestimate them, each interaction another echo of the world they are fleeing. Yet they also encounter fleeting moments of joy, a kiss that feels like discovery, a dance that feels like reclamation, the open desert offering beauty even as danger closes in. The narrative shifts from survival to transcendence, as though every crime, every confrontation, strips away one more layer of inhibition until only raw freedom remains. The twists are as sharp as the turns on the highway. A charming drifter enters their orbit, seducing with promises of excitement but leaving behind betrayal that costs them dearly. The police close in, one detective torn between duty and empathy, chasing them not only across state lines but into legend. And then comes the final chase, helicopters and sirens bearing down as the desert swallows the horizon. The car hurtles forward, two women hand in hand, their choice distilled to surrender or self-definition. The ending is seared into memory not because it is defeat, but because it is reclamation, a leap that transforms tragedy into liberation, a final gesture that insists their story will not be written by anyone else. What lingers is not only suspense but symbolism. The road itself becomes character, stretching like vein across America, carrying them deeper into both danger and truth. The desert's vastness mirrors their expanding sense of freedom, even as it isolates them. Their laughter, rare and luminous, feels like rebellion louder than any gunshot. And the film dares to ask what happens when women refuse to bend, when they seize choices denied them, even if those choices lead to the edge of a canyon. The excitement of this story lies not only in its plot twists, but in its audacity. It is a road trip that becomes myth, a crime story that becomes parable, a friendship that becomes legend. The characters don't merely run from the law, they run from every force that ever told them who they should be. And though their journey ends in dust and sky, it leaves behind a legacy that continues to ripple through cinema and culture, challenging us to ask what freedom costs, and whether we too would take the leap if faced with the same canyon. The story begins with quiet desperation, the kind that simmers beneath routine and only reveals itself in stolen glances, sighs, and the hollow sound of a clock ticking in the background. One woman, Thelma, lives in a marriage so suffocating it feels like a sentence. Her husband speaks to her not as partner but as possession, his words dismissive, his presence domineering, leaving her adrift in a life where she feels both unseen and unworthy. When she decides to step away, even for a weekend, her choice feels monumental, a small rebellion against years of being diminished. The other woman, Louise, is older, sharper, tougher around the edges. She has worn life like armor, her independence forged from pain she does not speak of easily. She works as waitress, her days filled with chatter and transactions, but her gaze hints at depths, at scars the world has forced her to carry. When she proposes a short getaway, it is not simply road trip but grasp for something freer, some horizon that promises more than routine. From the outset, their friendship is a balm. Where Thelma stumbles with naivety, Louise steadies her with pragmatism. Where Louise carries weight of control, Thelma lightens her with impulsive laughter. Theirs is a bond stitched together by difference, yet bound tightly by trust. Their convertible, turquoise and gleaming under the sun, becomes symbol of this trust, a vessel carrying them out of confines of small lives into wide expanse of possibility. The first miles of their journey are filled with laughter, cigarettes dangling from fingers, hair whipping in wind, music spilling out of the radio. These scenes glow with lightness, as though freedom could be simple, as though escape were only matter of distance. But even in these early stretches, the road foreshadows what's coming. The landscapes are vast but empty, their beauty tinged with loneliness. The camera lingers on open skies and endless highways, reminding us that freedom can be exhilarating but also isolating. Their conversations, too, are edged with shadow. Louise chides Thelma for her recklessness, warning her against men, against carelessness. Thelma laughs, dismissing danger, her innocence clashing with Louise's lived experience. These exchanges, playful at first, grow heavier as night falls and they stop at roadside bar. Here, the story tilts. The bar is smoky, filled with neon glow and men leaning over pool tables, beer bottles clinking like warning bells. Thelma, swept up in excitement of being away from her husband, lets loose, dancing, laughing, drinking with abandon. Louise watches with wary eyes, sensing storm in the way a man hovers too close, his charm edged with entitlement. And then, outside in the parking lot, the laughter curdles. What begins as flirtation twists into violence, his grip turning forceful, his voice thick with threat. Thelma's laughter collapses into terror, and suddenly the road trip that promised freedom is ruptured by brutal reminder of why freedom is necessary. Louise arrives just in time, fury radiating through her, a gun raised steady in her hand. Her command is sharp, her voice filled with authority. For a moment, it seems the situation will end with him retreating, humiliated but alive. But then his words, dripping with cruelty, ignite her anger beyond control. A shot rings out, sudden and final. The silence that follows is deafening. The women freeze, their breaths ragged, eyes wide as they process what has just occurred. A single act has cleaved their journey in two, before and after, innocence and consequence. They flee, the convertible now carrying not only laughter but guilt, fear, and urgency. Their dialogue on the road bristles with panic, Thelma's disbelief clashing with Louise's grim pragmatism. Louise insists they cannot go to police. She knows system will not believe them, that their story will be twisted, that they will be branded criminals rather than survivors. Thelma trembles, torn between horror and loyalty, realizing her trust in Louise binds her to this decision. It is here, in aftermath of gunshot, that friendship transforms from bond of joy to bond of survival. The first half of the film drives forward with this newfound urgency. Every stop, every encounter, is weighted with risk. They try to find normalcy in diners and motels, but unease hangs heavy. Police begin piecing together events, the law tightening its net, their faces appearing in reports. One detective, empathetic yet constrained by system, begins to see them not as villains but as women forced into impossible corner. His pursuit becomes another layer of tension, his understanding useless against machinery of justice that demands capture. Along the way, they meet characters who shape their path. A young drifter, charming and reckless, catches Thelma's eye. He is unlike her husband, free-spirited, unmoored, thrilling in his unpredictability. For Thelma, his presence is intoxicating, a glimpse of life unshackled. Yet his betrayal, stealing money they desperately need, will harden her, transforming her from naive passenger into active participant in their rebellion. This transformation is slow in first half, but seeds are planted, Thelma beginning to step out of shadow, beginning to seize control. Meanwhile, Louise carries burden of silence about her past. Hints drop, she has been hurt before, she has scars not yet spoken. Her fury at the predator in parking lot is not random but rooted in old wounds. Though she does not name it, we sense history of trauma, the kind that makes her distrustful of institutions that promise protection. Her insistence they cannot go to police is not paranoia but knowledge born from lived injustice. In the first half, this silence hangs heavy, a mystery that deepens her character and explains her resolve. The convertible becomes more than vehicle. It is moving cocoon, holding their conversations, their laughter, their arguments. The desert stretches endlessly around them, its vastness both freedom and trap. The camera often frames car against empty horizons, underscoring both exhilaration of escape and inevitability of isolation. Each mile takes them further from old lives, but also deeper into danger. The first half crescendos as they realize there is no turning back. Thelma, once hesitant, begins embracing rebellion, her voice steadier, her eyes sharper. Louise, once fully in control, begins showing cracks, the weight of choices bearing down. Their roles subtly shift, the naive becoming hardened, the hardened becoming weary. This inversion marks midpoint of story, where their friendship is no longer escape but lifeline, where survival depends not on destination but on how fiercely they hold on to each other. By the end of first half, what began as weekend getaway has transformed into odyssey of fugitives. They are no longer merely running from law, but from lives that sought to cage them. The gunshot in parking lot reverberates through every scene, shaping their choices, their fears, their laughter that now carries edge of defiance. The detective closes in, the drifter plants seeds of betrayal, the horizon grows darker. The audience senses what they sense. There is no simple return, no easy resolution. The first half leaves them not on edge of canyon, but already on precipice of fate, with only loyalty to each other as compass. What makes this first half so powerful is its balance of tenderness and tension. The laughter of early miles lingers even as sirens echo in distance. The bond between women deepens even as the world closes around them. Every moment carries double weight, joy edged with sorrow, freedom shadowed by consequence. It is not only road trip, but reckoning, not only friendship, but revolution. The second half of the story begins with the sense of inevitability tightening around the women like a noose. They have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and though the open road still stretches out ahead, every mile is shadowed by pursuit. Their faces begin appearing on television screens, their names muttered by strangers, their freedom shrinking even as they push deeper into landscapes that seem endless. It is here that the narrative transforms from story of panic into story of defiance. They are no longer merely running, they are choosing how they will live, and how they will be remembered. Thelma is the first to shift. Where once she trembled in the wake of violence, now she begins to harden, her eyes clear with something resembling purpose. The betrayal of the drifter, his theft of their money after seducing her with promises of liberation, becomes catalyst. Instead of retreating into shame, she channels fury into action. She robs convenience store with confidence so startling even Louise can only stare. The Thelma who once asked permission to leave her house now strides into criminality with a kind of reckless grace. For the first time, she tastes agency, and though it is dangerous, it is also intoxicating. Louise, on the other hand, begins to unravel. She carries weight of what happened in that parking lot, and the silence around her past grows heavier. The audience senses what she cannot bring herself to say, that she has lived through trauma before, that institutions have failed her, that her fury that night was not impulse but culmination. Now, each decision adds another stone to the burden she carries. She maintains control outwardly, planning routes, steering car, making choices, but cracks show. The way her hands tremble on steering wheel, the way her voice falters when she insists on pushing forward, reveals exhaustion. Together, the women balance each other in this inversion of roles. Thelma's newfound daring becomes fuel for both, keeping their spirits alive, while Louise's growing weariness grounds them, preventing their defiance from slipping into chaos. Their friendship deepens into something elemental, less about shared laughter, more about shared survival. The convertible becomes more than vessel, it is womb, coffin, sanctuary, prison, carrying them toward fate neither can articulate but both begin to sense. The police pursuit intensifies. The detective who has studied them grows increasingly sympathetic, seeing not criminals but victims forced into rebellion. His conversations with colleagues reveal frustration. He knows that if they are caught, the system will not listen to nuance, that the narrative of two armed fugitives will drown out any truth of assault, trauma, or desperation. He tries to reach them, his voice over phone soft, pleading, offering possibility of surrender without annihilation. But the women, bound by mistrust of system and loyalty to each other, refuse. To them, surrender is betrayal, not just of themselves, but of every woman who has ever been silenced. The landscapes grow starker as their journey pushes into desert. The wide skies, once symbols of possibility, now loom like witnesses. Dust trails follow their car like echoes of inevitability. Yet there is beauty in these settings, the sunrises painting horizon in fire, the canyon walls rising like ancient judges. The film lingers on these images, reminding us that even in desperation, there is grandeur, even in pursuit, there is poetry. The climax builds with relentless momentum. The women are cornered after narrow escapes, their options dwindling. Helicopters beat overhead, police cars swarm behind, the road narrowing into dead ends. Their convertible speeds forward, the roar of engine merging with their laughter that has returned, wilder now, threaded with defiance. In those moments, they are no longer fugitives but legends, their bond transcending fear. The final sequence is seared into cinematic memory. At the edge of canyon, the road disappears, law closing in from behind. The detective pleads with them, his voice breaking, his empathy finally laid bare. For a moment, silence falls. The women glance at each other, their hands reaching across seats. There is no speechifying, no melodramatic farewell, just quiet recognition, trust distilled into a look. And then, with serene determination, they press the accelerator. The car surges forward, sunlight reflecting off its hood, dust spiraling into air, the canyon yawning ahead. The screen freezes mid-flight, the convertible suspended between earth and sky. It is a moment that defies categorization. Is it tragedy, triumph, liberation, despair? The ambiguity is deliberate. To some, it is tragic end of two women who could not outrun systems stacked against them. To others, it is ultimate act of freedom, refusal to let world dictate their ending. Symbolically, it is both. Leap into abyss that becomes flight into myth, a choice that transforms them from fugitives into legends. The second half lingers in memory because it refuses to soften. It does not grant neat resolution, does not return women to safety or compromise. It insists that rebellion has cost, that freedom exacts price, that survival sometimes means choosing how to fall. Thelma and Louise, once trapped in lives of invisibility, become immortal precisely because they refuse to vanish quietly. What makes this portion of story so extraordinary is the inversion of expectation. Thelma, once sheltered and timid, emerges as daring spirit, robbing stores, laughing at danger, seizing life with both hands. Louise, once sharp and unyielding, reveals her fragility, her haunted past pressing through cracks. Together, they embody totality of survival, daring and despair, laughter and exhaustion, rebellion and resignation. Their arc is not one of redemption but of reclamation, choosing to define their ending rather than let it be written for them. The second half transforms from chase thriller into myth. The desert becomes stage, the convertible becomes chariot, the canyon becomes altar. The law, with its helicopters and sirens, becomes faceless chorus of oppression, drowned out by the women's laughter as they speed toward fate. The final freeze frame denies us spectacle of crash, insisting instead on memory of flight. It is ending that resists closure, leaving us suspended in ambiguity, invited to decide for ourselves whether it is defeat or transcendence. And in that ambiguity lies its power. The second half of this story endures not because it resolves, but because it refuses to. It demands we question what freedom means, what rebellion costs, what friendship can endure. It leaves us with image of two women who, in choosing their own ending, rewrote narrative not only of their lives but of cinema itself. Characters in this story are not simply roles written on paper, they are living contradictions, fully embodied portraits of women forced to navigate a world that simultaneously diminishes them and punishes them for trying to break free. The brilliance lies in how each character is crafted not only as individual but also as symbol, carrying with them the weight of societal expectations, disappointments, and longings. When we peel back their layers, what we see is not just a tale of fugitives but a meditation on friendship, trauma, and the raw courage to redefine one's life, even in the face of ruin. At the heart stands Thelma, a woman whose arc is one of the most profound transformations in cinema. She begins as embodiment of passivity, suburban housewife hemmed in by a husband who treats her with contempt. In early scenes, her voice is timid, her laughter nervous, her choices small. She sneaks away for road trip like a child breaking curfew, hiding plans from husband as though her life were not her own. Yet, as the journey unfolds, every mile strips away her timidity. Her arc is not sudden but incremental. The first beer she sips with laughter, the first dance she allows herself, the first defiant refusal to retreat. By the time she robs convenience store with gun in hand, she has shed old skin entirely. This is not transformation from innocence to corruption, but from invisibility to agency. She does not become someone new, she becomes herself, the self long suppressed by fear and obedience. Louise, by contrast, begins with strength. She is pragmatic, sharp, protective, the kind of woman who has learned through scars to expect disappointment. As waitress, she moves with efficiency, her words clipped, her eyes steady. She embodies control, guiding Thelma with firm hand, steering both car and decisions with certainty. Yet her strength is not unbroken. Beneath it lies trauma never spoken outright but always present, shaping her every choice. Her decision to kill attacker in parking lot is not impulse but eruption of past scars, her fury sharpened by history audience can only infer. In second half, her control begins to fracture, her silence deepens, her shoulders slump, her voice trembles. Where Thelma grows into rebellion, Louise grows weary, bearing weight of choices and memories. Together, their arcs invert and complement. One rising into daring, the other collapsing into fragility, their friendship binding both transformations into unity. Their dynamic is heart of film. They are not opposites in simple sense but mirrors of possibility. Thelma embodies what Louise might have been without scars. Louise embodies what Thelma could become if her defiance hardened into bitterness. Their friendship is not sentimental but elemental, woven through shared laughter, arguments, silences. They fight, they comfort, they challenge, they rescue. Each scene between them is layered with both love and friction, revealing that true friendship is not absence of conflict but refusal to abandon. Symbolically, they represent duality of womanhood under oppression, innocence crushed into rebellion, strength forged through trauma. Secondary characters orbit them like satellites, each reflecting societal forces pressing down. Thelma's husband is caricature of entitlement, his every word soaked in arrogance, his every gesture dismissive. He is not villain in sense of malice but in sense of banality, embodiment of patriarchy so normalized it does not recognize itself as oppressive. His presence early in film contextualizes Thelma's desperation for escape. His obliviousness later underscores futility of institutions meant to protect women. The drifter who seduces Thelma is equally layered. Charming, handsome, intoxicating, he offers glimpse of excitement she has never tasted. For a moment, he seems liberator, giving her passion denied by marriage. Yet his betrayal, stealing money, reminds us that charm often conceals exploitation. He is not only character but symbol of fleeting promises that crumble under pressure, catalyst for Thelma's final transformation into self-reliant outlaw. The detective, Hal, is perhaps most complex secondary figure. He embodies empathy within system that is otherwise faceless and brutal. His voice over phone is gentle, his eyes weary with recognition of injustice. He sees Thelma and Louise not as criminals but as women forced into impossible choices. Yet his empathy is useless against machinery of law. He becomes tragic figure, not villain, not savior, but witness to injustice he cannot prevent. Symbolically, he represents limits of individual decency within corrupt structures, reminder that kindness cannot undo systemic cruelty. Even nameless characters play symbolic roles. The predator in parking lot is embodiment of entitlement, his violence shattering illusion of safety. Truck driver who harasses them on highway represents casual misogyny, his crude gestures becoming provocation that finally ignites their fury into iconic act of rebellion, blowing up his rig in plume of fire. Each man they encounter is not merely individual but archetype of obstacles women face. Belittlement, betrayal, harassment, predation. The car itself becomes character, turquoise convertible slicing through landscapes, carrying their laughter, their tears, their choices. It is vessel of freedom, coffin of inevitability, symbol of rebellion. As it hurtles toward canyon, it transforms from machine into myth, embodying their final refusal to surrender. Symbolically, characters function on dual planes, human and allegorical. Thelma is woman reclaiming self. Louise is survivor haunted by past. Husband is patriarchy normalized. Drifter is charm masking exploitation. Detective is decency trapped in system. Predator is violence made flesh. Truck driver is misogyny casual yet corrosive. Together, they create world that is not exaggerated but reflective of lived realities, amplified into allegory. What lingers most is how deeply human these characters feel despite their symbolism. Thelma's laughter is infectious, Louise's weariness heartbreaking, Hal's empathy genuine. They are not mouthpieces but people, layered with contradictions. That humanity is what transforms film from polemic into art. We do not merely analyze them, we feel them. In conclusion, character analysis here reveals tapestry of identities woven into narrative of rebellion. At center are two women whose arcs invert and intertwine, surrounded by figures that embody societal forces pressing against them. Together, they transform story into legend, their humanity into allegory, their choices into myth. And that is why these characters endure, not as fugitives, but as symbols of freedom, friendship, and defiance that continues to echo decades later. Every film carries its oddities, the accidents, the improvisations, the quirks of production that shape the final story in ways no script ever predicts. With this one, the strangeness is woven into its DNA, making it not only a landmark of cinema but also a tapestry of behind-the-scenes decisions and accidents that turned a modest road drama into myth. To explore its strangest facts is to see how fate, chance, and sheer stubbornness collide in art. One of the strangest truths is that the casting nearly looked entirely different. Several high-profile actresses were approached before the two leads were finally chosen. Names that now feel almost unthinkable hovered around the project. Some turned it down because they thought the script was too small, others because they feared audiences wouldn't accept a story about women fugitives without a love subplot to soften it. In hindsight, it seems absurd, but at the time, studios were deeply cautious. That these particular actresses, with their contrasting energies, one luminous in her innocence, the other sharpened by experience, ended up together was both accident and stroke of fate. Their chemistry became so essential that imagining anyone else feels impossible, yet the fact remains. The pairing was a narrow escape from an alternate reality. The choice of director, too, came down to chance. The script passed through several hands, with different visions attached. Some saw it as smaller character drama, others as thriller leaning toward exploitation. It finally landed with a filmmaker known for visual grandeur, someone unlikely candidate for intimate feminist story. Yet it was precisely this strangeness, a director of epic worlds taking on story of two women in a car, that gave it mythic scale. His landscapes turned highways into cathedrals, his sunsets into hymns, his framing into iconography. What could have been gritty indie became visual legend. Filming itself brought quirks. The car, turquoise convertible now etched into memory, was not single vehicle but fleet of them, each rigged for different angles, each modified in small ways. Crew members joked about how many Louise's cars existed. By end of shoot, several were battered, interiors worn from endless takes, engines pushed to their limit by desert heat. One, used in the canyon finale, was sacrificed completely, hurled into void while cameras rolled. That destruction, though meticulously planned, felt almost ritualistic, as though crew were sending car to Valhalla along with its passengers. One of the most peculiar facts involves the ending. The iconic freeze frame was not the original plan. The initial cut showed car plummeting, vanishing into canyon dust, a finality so bleak it left test audiences devastated. The decision to freeze at the moment of flight transformed meaning entirely. Instead of watching destruction, viewers are left with image of transcendence, ambiguity that elevates tragedy into legend. That one editorial choice, born of strange necessity, redefined film's legacy. Improvisation colored performances. The infamous explosion of the trucker's rig, provoked by his lewd gestures, was filmed with genuine surprise from extras watching plume of fire erupt into desert sky. The laughter of the women felt spontaneous, unrestrained, as though they themselves couldn't believe they had just destroyed a symbol of harassment so literally. Similarly, small gestures, the way one character eats ice cream absent-mindedly in tense moment, or the way the other lights cigarette with shaky hands, were not scripted but discovered on set. These odd, minor details now feel inseparable from the film's texture. Strangest of all may be its reception. When released, it split critics down the middle. Some hailed it as feminist masterpiece, others dismissed it as reckless fantasy. The strange irony is that what made detractors uneasy two women rejecting submission, embracing violence, choosing their own ending, is precisely what ensured its endurance. The backlash, filled with nervous commentary about dangerous influence, only cemented it as cultural milestone. That discomfort, born from strangeness of seeing women do what male anti-heroes had done for decades, became part of its myth. Even the drifter's role carries odd fact. It marked early career leap for actor who would later become global star. At time, he was virtually unknown, cast because of charisma that shimmered even in brief audition. His scenes were filmed quickly, his screen time limited, yet his presence exploded into cultural consciousness. Strangely, a supporting role meant to be footnote became springboard, his charm and betrayal forever linked to story's legacy. The desert itself conspired to add quirks. Heat-warped equipment, dust-clogged cameras, wind-whipped dialogue into inaudibility. Crew fought nature daily, improvising shields from tarps and blankets. Some days filming stopped entirely as storms swept across plains, leaving behind skies so dramatic they were woven into later shots. The environment became collaborator, its unpredictability adding grandeur no budget could have bought. And then there is the strangest fact of all: the film was never expected to endure. It was seen as risk, a curiosity, a project likely to vanish after modest run. Yet through quirks of casting, chance of direction, accidents of editing, and sheer cultural hunger for story that dared to break rules, it grew into legend. The strangeness is not just in trivia but in transformation, how something born of risk and accident became icon, how a car in desert became myth, how two women meant to vanish into canyon instead soared into history. Critical perspectives on this film have never been quiet, never neutral. From the moment it landed, it stirred argument, debate, and outright panic in some corners of cultural commentary. The story of two women on the run, driving across dusty highways, laughing and weeping and defying authority, was received as both revelation and provocation. To trace the critical perspectives and the key events surrounding its release is to enter a chorus of voices, some praising it as radical feminist text, others condemning it as dangerous, all contributing to its place as one of the most contested and celebrated films of its era. One of the earliest and most enduring critical perspectives is its place in feminist cinema. For decades, the road film had been a masculine domain, stories of men hitting highways to find themselves, to escape, to rebel. Women in those films were usually lovers, obstacles, or symbols. Here the narrative was inverted, women in the driver's seat, men relegated to sidelines. Critics saw this inversion as radical gesture, reorienting genre around female subjectivity. The key event that defined this was not only the gunshot in parking lot but everything that followed. Women refusing to seek validation from institutions, refusing to apologize, refusing to be contained. Feminist critics celebrated it as reclaiming of narrative space, a cinematic declaration that women's stories of rebellion mattered as much as men's. But alongside this celebration came backlash. Some male critics accused the film of promoting violence, portraying men as villains, and encouraging women to reject law and order. They bristled at iconic moments like the destruction of Trucker's rig, interpreting it as man-hating spectacle. These criticisms often revealed their own anxieties more than the film's supposed flaws. The key event of its release was the way it split reviewers, some hailing it as masterpiece, others condemning it as irresponsible fantasy. This polarization itself became part of its legacy, proof that it had struck nerve deeper than plot. Another critical perspective situates the film within mythmaking. Scholars argued that it functioned less as realist drama and more as modern myth. The car became chariot, desert became stage, final leap into canyon became transcendence. Events such as the freeze-frame ending were dissected endlessly. Was it tragedy, liberation, or both? Critics drew parallels to Greek tragedy, to outlaw myths, to Bonnie and Clyde. But unlike those stories, this one gave women the mythic role, elevating them from characters to icons. The key event here was the Cannes premiere, where international critics embraced it as legend rather than mere genre piece, cementing it as text that transcended its American box office. Sociological critiques focused on class and geography. The women were not wealthy heroines with resources, they were working class, one a waitress, the other a housewife. Their rebellion was not only against men but against economic structures that left them vulnerable. Critics pointed to events like Thelma robbing convenience store not as simple crime but as commentary on desperation born from systemic neglect. Geography, too, mattered. The road trip took them from small towns into deserts, landscapes that mirrored their psychological journey. From confinement into vastness, from familiarity into unknown. Key cinematic events: the dance at roadside bar, the betrayal by Drifter, the silent drive across empty desert, were read as milestones in Map of America's contradictions. Performance critics highlighted the chemistry of leads as event in itself. Their laughter in Convertible, their silence after violence, their final clasp of hands, all became indelible images. The decision to freeze frame their leap was analyzed as ultimate acknowledgement that performance had transcended narrative. The actors had not just played characters but embodied archetypes. Cultural critics in the early 1990s tied film to political climate. Conversations about sexual assault, gender inequality, and women's rights were gaining momentum. The parking lot scene was dissected as cinematic acknowledgement of realities too often silenced. Critics noted how the women's refusal to report assault echoed widespread mistrust of institutions that failed victims. The key event here was its reception among women audiences, who embraced film not as fantasy but as mirror of lived experiences. For many, it was first-time cinema allowed them to see defiance instead of compliance, survival instead of silence. Box office events added to legacy. Though not expected to perform strongly, it became sleeper hit, bolstered by word of mouth and cultural conversation. Its success startled studios, proving audiences hungered for stories outside traditional molds. The Academy Awards became another key event. Multiple nominations, including Best Director, Best Screenplay, and acting nods for both leads. Though it did not sweep, its presence in those categories marked recognition of cultural weight too large to ignore. Over time, critical perspective softened into consensus. It was no longer only feminist text, nor only myth, nor only controversy, but all at once. Academic essays proliferated, film schools taught it as landmark, popular culture parroted and referenced it endlessly. Events like retrospectives, anniversary screenings, and critical re-evaluations turned what was once dangerous into canon. Yet its edges remained sharp. Even decades later, debates flare. Was the ending nihilistic or liberating? Did it glorify violence or expose necessity? Perhaps the strangest critical event is how it crossed boundaries of audience. Teenagers embraced it as rebellious fantasy, older women as validation of silenced struggles, men as unsettling mirror of patriarchal excess. It became not only film but conversation starter, its key events replayed in classrooms, essays, living rooms. In sum, the critical perspectives and events surrounding the story reveal its paradox. It was both celebrated and condemned, both feminist text and myth, both realist drama and allegory. Its key moments, the parking lot gunshot, the drifter's betrayal, the explosion of truck, the canyon leap, were not just plot points but cultural detonations, sparking debates that still echo. Its legacy lies not in neat resolution but in noise it created, the chorus of voices it summoned, the way it forced culture to confront what it wanted women to be and what happens when women refuse. Behind the making of this film lies a saga almost as dramatic as the story it tells. What reached the screen as seamless rebellion and myth was in fact built from compromises, accidents, and 1,000 small improvisations stitched together in desert heat. The production history brims with fun facts that feel stranger than fiction, quirks that remind us cinema is never purely intentional but always part accident, part serendipity. To wander through these production insights is to see how a modestly budgeted film transformed into cultural landmark. It began, oddly enough, with doubt. The script circulated for years, passed from studio to studio, each hesitant to finance a story about two women fugitives. Executives balked at its bleakness, its politics, its refusal to soften. Early drafts nearly shifted its core. One studio suggested a male love interest become more central, another proposed a reconciliation ending where the women surrendered to authorities. Each note missed the point, and for a time the project languished. What saved it was stubbornness, screenwriter and producers refusing to dilute vision, insisting story be told with defiance intact. Casting became its own adventure. Before the final pair were chosen, several names were attached and detached. At one stage, Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep circled the project. At another, Michelle Pfeiffer and Jodie Foster were courted. Scheduling conflicts, doubts, and shifting studio interest derailed each pairing. Only later did Susan Sarandon and Geena Davis step into roles, their chemistry immediate and electric. Sarandon brought gravitas, steeliness, and hard-won authority. Davis carried innocence ripening into rebellion. Fun fact, the two bonded on set so deeply that they often rewrote lines together, shaping dialogue until it felt like genuine banter rather than scripted exchange. Their friendship off-camera mirrored characters, giving scenes authenticity impossible to fake. The director, Ridley Scott, was not the obvious choice. Known for visual epics like Blade Runner and Alien, he seemed unlikely candidate for intimate feminist road drama. Yet his eye for grandeur reshaped film's scale. Under his vision, deserts became cathedrals, sunsets became hymns, the car a chariot of rebellion. His style elevated what could have been gritty indie into mythic legend. Fun fact: Scott insisted on shooting wide landscapes with anamorphic lenses, turning stretches of desert highway into vast canvases, as though two women in convertible were riding across eternity. The turquoise 1966 Ford Thunderbird convertible, now iconic, had its own quirks. Multiple cars were used during filming, each serving specific purpose. Some pristine for close-ups, others modified for stunts, one rigged for the canyon finale. By end, the cars bore scars of production, engines pushed to limits in desert heat, paint chipped from dust storms, interiors worn by endless takes. The car hurled into canyon during climax was gutted of engine and interior, lightened for stunt. Fun fact: Scott shot the leap with 6 cameras simultaneously, knowing it could only be done once. The freeze-frame ending, chosen later in editing, transformed destruction into transcendence. Improvisation colored many scenes. The explosion of Trucker's rig, filmed in one take, stunned onlookers. The laughter of Sarandon and Davis in that moment was real, bubbling from shock as Fireball lit desert sky. In another scene, Davis improvised Thelma's wide-eyed delight at first sip of bourbon, her giddy reaction adding layer of authenticity to character's awakening. Fun fact: Sarandon insisted on real cigarettes and real driving, refusing stand-ins whenever possible. She wanted grit of smoke in her lungs, wind in her hair, hands gripping wheel, not simulated, but lived. The drifter played by Brad Pitt became fun fact of his own. Virtually unknown at time, he beat out several bigger names with his charm in audition. His scenes were shot quickly, yet his charisma exploded on screen. Crew members joked they knew they had star in the making, when even playback operators swooned watching dailies. Fun fact: Davis later admitted she insisted on casting Pitt, telling Scott his audition carried spark no one else had. That instinct proved prophetic, launching his career. Filming in desert proved grueling. Heat-warped equipment, dust-clogged cameras, wind-whipped dialogue into static. Crew improvised constantly, tarps shielding microphones, ice-packed coolers doubling as camera stands, sunburned grips slathered in sunscreen while hauling gear. Some days production halted entirely as storms swept across plains, leaving behind skies so dramatic Scott folded them into film. Fun fact: one storm delayed shooting for hours but created sunsets so fiery it was used as backdrop for intimate conversation between leads. Meals were modest, camaraderie essential. With budget tight, catering was often simple spreads, and cast mingled with crew over sandwiches in shade of trucks. Sarandon and Davis joined in, no separation between stars and crew, their laughter carrying across desert. This intimacy built spirit of family on set, mirroring bond of characters. Fun fact: Davis once joined crew for impromptu baseball game during break, her competitiveness startling everyone, her laughter echoing across dust. Editing shaped film into legend. Early cuts included grim plunge into canyon, car vanishing into dust. Test audiences recoiled, devastated. Scott and editor Terry Rawlings reimagined it, freeze frame at moment of flight. This simple choice changed tone entirely. Instead of destruction, ending became liberation. Critics later hailed it as stroke of genius, though in truth it was desperate adjustment to salvage audience reception. Fun fact: the freeze frame was achieved by cutting frames before car began descent, a solution invented in post, not planned during shoot. The soundtrack also carried quirks. Hans Zimmer provided score, blending melancholic guitar with sweeping chords. Yet budget constraints meant some cues were assembled from demo recordings, not polished studio sessions. The rawness matched grit of story, giving film soundscape that felt authentic rather than manufactured. Reception added another layer of strangeness. The film polarized critics, ignited cultural firestorms, and became lightning rod in conversations about gender. Fun fact: it premiered at Cannes, where audiences gave standing ovation, yet in American press some critics derided it as anti-male fantasy. The contradiction itself became part of myth, fueling debates that only amplified its presence. In retrospect, the fun facts for Mosaic, a project nearly derailed by studio doubt, saved by stubbornness, casting choices that almost went another way, crystallizing into perfection, improvisations born of necessity that became iconic moments, accidents of weather that turned into visual poetry, editorial decisions made under pressure that redefined legacy. The film's behind-the-scenes story mirrors its narrative. Two women improvising survival, carving legend from desperation. The truth is, production was never smooth. It stumbled, scraped, and clawed its way forward. But like its heroines, it refused to surrender, embracing flaws until they became fingerprints. That is why its production story remains as compelling as its narrative, a testament to how cinema, like rebellion, is forged not in perfection but in imperfection, not in certainty but in risk. Settings in this story breathe like characters. They do not simply frame the action, they press against it, reshape it, and ultimately become the canvas upon which freedom and doom are painted. To understand the cinematic power of this film, you must step into its landscapes. The smoky bars, the cramped kitchens, the open highways, the vast deserts, and recognize that each space is more than geography. Each one is symbolic terrain, reflecting the emotional states of two women who refuse to be contained. The earliest settings are intimate and confining. Thelma's home is suffocating in its banality, a kitchen that looks more like cage than comfort, a husband lounging in recliner barking commands. The lighting here is dull, washed out, evoking a life drained of vitality. Mise-en-scene reinforces her invisibility. Cluttered countertops, muted wallpaper, details that tell us this is house of stagnation rather than sanctuary. Louise's workplace, a diner, carries similar weight. Neon flickers against greasy surfaces, coffee cups clatter endlessly, and yet there is no glamour in this routine. The sound design fills space with chatter, orders barked, plates scraped. For Louise, this space embodies survival, a place where she has learned to wear control as armor. In these early scenes, settings confine. They shrink, they suffocate, they underscore why escape feels necessary. Then comes the road, the film's true heart. Highways stretch endlessly, captured in wide shots that dwarf car against horizon. The turquoise Thunderbird convertible, gleaming under sun, becomes moving sanctuary. Here the camera breathes, framing women against sky so vast it feels infinite. The contrast with earlier interiors is striking. From suffocating rooms to boundless landscapes, the film visually enacts liberation. Cinematography leans into mythic scale, turning deserts and highways into cathedrals of freedom. Yet this freedom is not simple. The landscapes are also barren, isolating. The further they drive, the emptier the world becomes, underscoring danger lurking beneath liberation. The bar where violence erupts is shot with claustrophobic tension. Neon glow saturates walls, smoke curls in corners, shadows cling to faces. The dance floor seems playful until it turns predatory, and the parking lot outside becomes stage of horror. The transition from interior warmth to exterior darkness is stark. The camera plunges us into night heavy with menace. When the gunshot shatters silence, the emptiness of setting amplifies weight. No one to witness, no one to protect, only desert air swallowing consequence. Motels become recurring settings, each carrying symbolism of impermanence. Their rooms are generic, walls beige, carpets threadbare. They are places of rest that never feel like home, liminal spaces between safety and danger. Cinematography frames them with melancholy, lingering on neon signs flickering in night, emphasizing transient nature of women's existence. Fun detail: the motel where Thelma meets Drifter is filmed with warmth and shadow, suggesting temptation and betrayal woven into walls. The sound of trains in distance reminds us even here, escape is temporary. Gas stations and diners journey like punctuation marks. They are liminal spaces where strangers enter orbit briefly, sometimes offering kindness, often judgment. Camera treats them with stark realism, fluorescent lighting, chrome surfaces, buzzing noise. These places, ordinary in any other film, here become mirrors of societal structures. They are spaces where women are reminded they are fugitives, outsiders, vulnerable. The banality of these locations contrasts with mythic landscapes, emphasizing tension between ordinary America and extraordinary rebellion unfolding within it. The desert dominates second half. Its vastness is captured with epic grandeur, rolling plains, jagged cliffs, skies burning with sunset. Cinematography leans into Ridley Scott's visual style, wide frames, saturated colors, landscapes that feel timeless. The desert is paradox, freedom and prison, sanctuary and trap. Its emptiness offers escape, yet its isolation ensures pursuit is inescapable. When car speeds across dirt roads, dust trailing like comet tail, desert becomes visual metaphor for rebellion burning against inevitability. The truck explosion is staged in open desert, sky vast above plume of fire. The emptiness amplifies spectacle, turning act of defiance into symbol. The sound design here is crucial: roar of fire, laughter of women, silence of landscape. No witnesses but us, the audience, who recognize rebellion has become myth. Cinematography throughout balances intimacy and grandeur. Close-ups capture trembling hands, furrowed brows, tears glistening. Wide shots place car against monumental landscapes, emphasizing both scale of freedom and insignificance of individuals against world. Editing weaves between these extremes, reminding us that rebellion is both deeply personal and universally symbolic. Lighting shifts with narrative. Interiors are often dim, shadowed, reflecting confinement. Exteriors blaze with harsh sunlight, sometimes golden and liberating, other times scorching and oppressive. Twilight sequences, particularly in second half, glow with melancholy, sun dipping below horizon as if mirroring dwindling options. The final sequence, bathed in light, turns canyon into altar. Soundscape is equally deliberate. The roar of car engine is heartbeat of film, constant pulse beneath dialogue. Songs on radio shift from playful to poignant, each choice reflecting mood of journey. Silence often punctuates tension, pauses in dialogue heavy with what cannot be said. The desert wind whispers in background, trains thunder across distance, helicopters roar in final pursuit, all sounds of inevitability pressing against rebellion. Mise-en-scene adds symbolic layers. The Thunderbird's turquoise color, vibrant against muted deserts, symbolizes life, defiance, freedom. Guns, ever present, symbolize both danger and agency. Cigarettes, drinks, makeup bags, and sunglasses litter car, turning it into shrine of both femininity and rebellion. Every object carries weight. The final setting, the Grand Canyon, is culmination of visual symbolism. The road ends abruptly, cliffs yawning into abyss. Cinematography frames canyon as both doom and transcendence, ancient and indifferent. When car hurtles toward edge, setting transforms into stage of myth. Freeze frame at moment of flight immortalizes setting as symbol, not location. The canyon becomes timeless, eternal, embodying both end and liberation. What makes these cinematic elements extraordinary is their refusal to remain neutral. Settings are never backdrop, they are emotional terrain. Cinematography, lighting, sound, mise-en-scene, each conspires to transform rebellion into legend. Ordinary spaces like kitchens and motels reflect confinement. Extraordinary landscapes like deserts and canyon elevate story into myth. The car speeds between them, stitching together confinement and liberation, ordinary and extraordinary, mortal and mythic. The film's enduring power lies not only in performances or plot, but in how settings and cinematic elements conspire to tell story beneath story. They whisper what words cannot, that freedom is vast yet fragile, that landscapes mirror inner states, that rebellion always ends at cliff's edge. Watching it, we are not only following fugitives, we are moving through emotional geography, every horizon a mirror of longing, every shadow a reminder of cost. Behind the camera, this story was not a smooth, polished production. It was a trial by fire in the desert heat, a constant negotiation between artistic ambition and logistical constraint, an odyssey that mirrored the very themes it sought to capture on screen. To explore the behind-the-scenes history is to see how chaos, improvisation, and sheer audacity combine to create one of cinema's most enduring myths. What follows is not tidy chronology but lived tapestry, stitched together from choices, accidents, and strange little miracles that shaped the final film. The script began as a stubborn outlier in Hollywood's marketplace. Callie Cowrie, then an unknown screenwriter, had written a story unlike anything studios wanted to finance. The idea of two women on the run, rejecting the law and ending in tragedy or transcendence, frightened executives. 4 years, the screenplay languished, passed from hand to hand like hot coal. Some tried to reshape it, adding a love interest, softening violence, forcing reconciliation. Yet Cowrie refused, clinging to vision that demanded two women define their own ending. That refusal itself became part of legend, a film born not from compromise but from defiance. When Ridley Scott entered, the project's tone shifted. Known for operatic scale in Alien and Blade Runner, he seemed odd match for intimate feminist road movie. Yet his instinct was not to shrink material but to elevate it. He saw in desert highways what he had once seen in dystopian skylines. Grandeur, myth, canvas upon which rebellion could be painted. His eye transformed story from potential indie into visual epic. Desert sunsets stretched like brushstrokes of gods. Crew members later recalled how Scott would linger for hours, waiting for light to strike cliffs just so, capturing images that turned car chase into modern legend. Casting carried its own saga. For months, the film seemed destined for other names. Meryl Streep paired with Goldie Hawn, Jodie Foster paired with Michelle Pfeiffer. Each combination collapsed under scheduling conflicts or studio nerves. By the time Susan Sarandon and Geena Davis stepped into roles, production was already teetering. Yet the chemistry between them, discovered almost instantly, became foundation. Sarandon, with authority and steel, grounded film. Davis, with wide-eyed innocence blooming into rebellion, gave it heart. Off-camera, they became allies, rewriting lines, shaping rhythms, demanding authenticity. Their friendship deepened as production progressed, mirroring arc of characters until line between fiction and reality blurred. Brad Pitt's casting became another piece of lore. Then an unknown, he entered auditions with charm that startled everyone. Legend has it that Geena Davis herself pushed hardest for his inclusion, sensing spark that others overlooked. His role, small but pivotal, became springboard to stardom. Behind scenes, his arrival was met with quiet amusement. No one suspected the drifter with crooked grin would one day be household name. Crew members recall how even in downtime, extras and assistants gravitated toward him, drawn by charisma that cameras later immortalized. Filming in desert brought daily trials. Temperatures soared, equipment faltered, windstorms erased hours of preparation. Sound teams fought to capture dialogue through gusts of sand. Cinematographers shielded lenses with improvised tarps. Yet from these struggles came images unmatched. Skies painted in fire at dusk, storms rolling across plains like omens. The environment became collaborator as much as adversary, sculpting film with moods that no studio set could replicate. Improvisation colored production in ways later hailed as genius. The explosion of Trucker's rig, for instance, was filmed in one take, flames roaring higher than expected. Sarandon and Davis, startled, burst into laughter, their delight captured as spontaneous rebellion. That take remained, its authenticity impossible to script. Other moments emerged from accidents, a stumble during chase, a cigarette lit with shaking hands, a silence too heavy to fill. Scott, attuned to truth and imperfection, insisted these remain, building film from fragments of accident as much as design. Meals on set reflected budgetary modesty. This was no pampered production with endless catering spreads. Cast and crew often ate together at local diners or picnic tables, their conversations mingling work and life. Sarandon, ever the activist, would engage grips and assistants in discussions about politics, about meaning of story they were telling. Davis, competitive by nature, once joined crew in impromptu baseball game, her laughter echoing across desert. These moments of camaraderie softened grind of long days, binding production into temporary family. The Thunderbird convertibles became characters of their own. Multiple cars were deployed, some pristine for close-ups, others battered for stunts. Mechanics worked tirelessly to keep them running under desert strain. One car was stripped and hollowed for final leap into canyon, its sacrifice a ritual that symbolized story's essence. Scott staged that leap with 6 cameras rolling, knowing they had only one chance. Fun fact whispered years later, the crew cheered as car vanished into void, not out of glee but out of awe, sensing they had captured moment that would echo through cinema. Editing shaped final myth. Early cuts showed car plunging into canyon, dust swallowing it. Test audiences recoiled, devastated. The choice to freeze at moment of flight was born not from plan but from necessity, salvaging audience response. That editorial accident elevated ending from bleak finality into timeless transcendence, transforming tragedy into legend. What once felt like compromise became stroke of genius, proof that cinema's accidents sometimes outshine its intentions. The soundtrack carried its own quirks. Hans Zimmer, still early in Hollywood career, composed score blending melancholic guitar with sweeping chords. Limited budget meant some tracks were rougher, recorded in modest studios. Yet their rawness matched film's tone, fragile, haunting, alive with ache. Against roar of engines and whispers of desert wind, Zimmer's music lingered like memory, amplifying defiance rather than softening it. Cultural firestorm followed release. Critics polarized, some hailing it as feminist revolution, others condemning it as dangerous fantasy. The debate became part of production's afterlife, overshadowing struggles of its making. For cast and crew, the strangest truth was how small project they fought to survive became international lightning rod. They remembered desert dust, improvised tarps, laughter over sandwiches, and could scarcely reconcile those memories with headlines declaring film cultural event. Looking back, behind-the-scenes story mirrors narrative. Just as Thelma and Louise stumbled, clashed, and endured, so too did production. It survived storms, accidents, skepticism, and budgetary strain. It made mistakes, improvised solutions, discovered truth in imperfections. And like its heroines, it refused to surrender, hurling itself forward with audacity that transformed fragility into legend. The lesson of this production is not that perfection breeds greatness, but that imperfection, embraced fully, can carve myth. The dust, the laughter, the accidents, the freeze frame, these were not obstacles but gifts. The film endures not because it was easy, but because it was hard, because every frame carries fingerprints of struggle. In this way, the behind-the-scenes story is not separate from narrative, but its reflection, a rebellion in process as much as in plot. Themes and symbolism run like an underground current through this story, charging every scene with meanings that stretch far beyond plot. To watch the film only as chase narrative is to miss its pulse. What makes it endure is the way it transforms ordinary settings and gestures into symbols of freedom, trauma, friendship, and defiance. Its themes are not whispered, they roar, even when silence fills the screen. At its core, the film wrestles with freedom. The open road, the convertible, the desert landscapes, all become emblems of a freedom long denied. In the beginning, Thelma lives in home that feels like cage, marriage that smothers her into invisibility. Louise works in diner where her labor is transactional, her identity reduced to service. The first miles of their trip embody liberation, hair whipping in wind, laughter spilling out of windows, cigarettes dangling like badges of rebellion. Yet freedom here is never untroubled. Every horizon is shadowed by pursuit, every mile by danger. Symbolically, freedom is both intoxicating and fleeting, an expanse of sky that collapses into canyon's edge. The film also wrestles with patriarchy's violence. Nearly every male character embodies structure that seeks to control, exploit, or diminish. The predator in parking lot is violence made flesh, his assault reminder of danger women navigate daily. The truck driver, with his lewd gestures, represents casual misogyny normalized into humor until confronted. The drifter embodies charm that masks exploitation, his betrayal symbolic of fleeting promises of liberation offered by men who ultimately reinforce dependence. Even Thelma's husband symbolizes banality of patriarchy, control so ingrained it doesn't recognize itself as cruelty. Against these forces, the women's defiance becomes more than crime, it becomes refusal of entire system. Friendship is perhaps the most luminous theme. Unlike romances that dominate road films, here intimacy exists between women, unmediated by men. Their bond is not sentimentalized but tested, through violence, betrayal, laughter, silence. When they clasp hands in final moment, the gesture carries weight of everything: loyalty, defiance, love that transcends category. Symbolically, their friendship is rebellion against narratives that insist women's lives must revolve around men. Their bond insists on itself as central, sufficient, immortal. Another theme is transformation. Thelma's arc is symbol of awakening. She begins timid, hiding plans from husband, asking permission for existence. Each choice along road strips away that timidity. Drinking with abandon, surviving assault, discovering betrayal, robbing store. Her transformation peaks in second half, when she laughs with exhilaration even as law closes in. Symbolically, she embodies possibility of liberation, even if temporary, for those crushed by domestic cages. Louise's arc, by contrast, is symbol of trauma's weight. Her silence about past haunts every decision, her control revealing scars invisible but indelible. Where Thelma rises into freedom, Louise sinks under burden of memory. Their arcs mirror yin and yang, one ascending into liberation, the other collapsing into inevitability, together forming whole. The car itself is central symbol. The turquoise Thunderbird is not just vehicle but vessel of rebellion. It carries laughter, arguments, cigarettes, guns. It slices across landscapes like chariot, bridging confinement and freedom. In final leap, it transforms from machine into myth, immortalized in freeze-frame flight. Symbolically, It embodies both fragility and transcendence. Metal and gasoline elevated into icon of liberation. The desert landscapes expand symbolism. Their vastness mirrors women's expanding sense of agency. Their isolation underscores inevitability of pursuit. Skies blaze with color, cliffs loom ancient and indifferent, dust trails follow car like echoes of fate. Symbolically, desert is both sanctuary and prison, freedom that reveals its own futility, beauty that frames tragedy. The canyon is ultimate symbol. Road ends in abyss, cliff's edge representing choice between surrender and self-definition. Their decision to accelerate transforms canyon from doom into altar. Freeze frame halts descent, leaving women suspended between earth and sky. Symbolically, canyon is death and transcendence, tragedy and liberation, defeat and victory. It embodies ambiguity that defines film. Freedom always costs, rebellion always ends at edge, but choice to leap transforms inevitability into myth. Silence is another recurring symbol. At dinner table, silence screams louder than dialogue. After assault, silence carries trauma words cannot. In final scene, silence before acceleration becomes covenant between women. Symbolically, silence embodies weight of unsaid, spaces where patriarchy's language cannot reach, where women communicate beyond words. The gun is complex symbol. It is tool of violence but also tool of agency. In parking lot, it saves life but seals fate. In Thelma's robbery, it transforms her from victim into actor. Symbolically, gun is paradox. Instrument of oppression in men's hands, instrument of reclamation in women's. It embodies danger of rebellion, empowerment intertwined with destruction. Themes of myth and legend saturate narrative. Critics note parallels to outlaw stories, Greek tragedy, modern American folklore. Thelma and Louise become archetypes, their leap into canyon echoing beyond narrative into culture. Symbolically, they are not merely fugitives but martyrs of freedom, saints of rebellion, icons of refusal. Even music carries symbolism. Hans Zimmer's melancholic score underscores fragility rather than triumph. Guitars strum like memories, chords linger like sighs. Absence of swelling victory music rejects cliché of underdog sports or outlaw heroes. Instead, music whispers fragility of hope, sorrow of inevitability, beauty of defiance. Ultimately, the film's themes and symbols converge on one truth. Freedom is fragile, rebellion costly, friendship eternal. Thelma and Louise do not win in conventional sense, but their refusal to surrender rewrites narrative. They choose their ending, seizing authorship denied them. Symbolically, they leap not into abyss but into history, their freeze frame suspended eternally in cultural memory. This is why film endures. Not because of plot alone, but because every car, every desert, every silence, every laugh is charged with meaning. It is story that asks us not only to watch but to question. What does freedom cost? What does rebellion mean? What is friendship worth? Its symbols whisper answers, ambiguous yet powerful, long after screen fades to white. Filmmaking techniques shape this story with as much force as script or performance. What might have been a small-scale road drama becomes an epic meditation because of choices in framing, editing, sound, and production design. To study these techniques is to see how Ridley Scott and his collaborators sculpted myth from dust and sunlight, how they elevated realism into allegory. And to trace its box office life is to see how a modestly budgeted film, doubted by studios, detonated into cultural event. Cinematography is the film's heartbeat. Adrian Biddle, behind the camera, captured landscapes with grandeur usually reserved for historical epics. Highways stretch into vanishing points, deserts roll vast and indifferent, sunsets blaze like cathedral-stained glass. Scott insisted on shooting with anamorphic lenses, giving car and sky mythic proportions. The Thunderbird convertible, turquoise against rust-colored earth, gleams like talisman. Wide shots dwarf women against horizons, underscoring both liberation and insignificance. Yet cinematography never abandons intimacy. Close-ups capture tremble of cigarette, glisten of tear, twitch of smile. The film oscillates between epic and intimate, constantly reminding us that rebellion is both universal and personal. Lighting reinforces thematic contrasts. Interiors, Thelma's kitchen, Louise's diner, are flat, dim, fluorescent, drained of vitality. Exteriors blaze with harsh sunlight, revealing every pore, every wrinkle, every grain of dust. Twilight sequences glow melancholy, the sky painted with fading hope. In climax, Canyon is bathed in pure light, cliffs glowing ancient gold. This play of shadow and blaze mirrors arcs of characters, from confinement to liberation, from dimness to blaze of final choice. Editing crafts rhythm of inevitability. Early sequences breathe, giving space to laughter and conversation. But once gunshot cracks parking lot, pace tightens. Cuts become jagged, races stutter between faces, feet, desert blurs. Silence is allowed to linger in arguments, pauses amplifying unspoken pain. In Final Chase, editing surges like heartbeat, sirens and helicopters slicing into rhythm until freeze frame halts time altogether. That freeze frame is itself technique of genius. By suspending car mid-flight, editor transforms narrative into myth, denying audience spectacle of crash, immortalizing choice as eternal act of defiance. Sound design amplifies realism. Engines roar like thunder, helicopters beat like war drums, trains rumble through scenes as reminders of inevitability. Dialogue often competes with environmental noise, wind whipping, tires screeching, voices nearly swallowed. This refusal to isolate sound adds texture, placing audience inside chaos rather than observing from distance. Silence is equally weaponized. The pause before gunshot, the quiet after betrayal, the wordless moment before leap. Each silence thunders louder than music. Music, composed by Hans Zimmer, weaves melancholy and restraint. Rather than swelling triumph, score leans into fragility, guitars strumming wistful, chords lingering unresolved. The soundtrack refuses cliché of outlaw heroics, instead whispering sorrow, inevitability, longing. Songs on car radio ground story and realism, each choice reflecting mood, country twangs, blues riffs, echoes of Americana. Music becomes both diegetic and symbolic, blending into texture of rebellion. Mise-en scene stitches symbolism. The Thunderbird, vibrant turquoise, dominates frames like third character. Guns appear not only as props but as symbols, held nervously, wielded defiantly, transforming from tool of oppression to tool of agency. Sunglasses, cigarettes, lipstick, scarves, all coded as femininity, become weapons of performance, shields against gaze of men and law. Motels cluttered with beige carpets and neon signs emphasize impermanence, transient spaces reflecting fugitives' fragile existence. Each object carries weight. Camera movement reinforces themes. Handheld shots during chaos mimic volatility, while smooth pans across desert emphasize grandeur. Close-ups during arguments refuse escape, forcing audience into intimacy of pain. High angles over canyon remind us of insignificance, while low angles on women in final moments elevate them into icons. The box office journey mirrors story itself, underestimated, doubted, then unstoppable. Budgeted modestly at around $16 million, the film was not expected to dominate. Studios feared controversy would alienate audiences, that a feminist road film would fail to sell. Yet upon release in 1991, it detonated. Word of mouth spread, debates erupted, audiences flocked not only for entertainment but for conversation it provoked. It grossed over $45 million domestically, a remarkable feat for film of its scale and subject. Internationally, it fared even better, its themes resonating across cultures. Critical reception amplified box office. Praised at Cannes, nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Director, Best Screenplay, and acting nods for both leads, it gained prestige that fueled ticket sales. It won for Best Original Screenplay, cementing Cowrey's place in history. But its cultural box office impact cannot be measured in dollars alone. Headlines, op-eds, late-night debates turned it into phenomenon. Viewers did not just watch, they argued, they protested, they celebrated. Merchandising remained minimal. This was not blockbuster with toys or t-shirts, but imagery itself spread. Posters of Thunderbird against desert, hands clasped mid-laughter, freeze frame of canyon leap became iconic. These images circulated as cultural capital, embedding film into visual lexicon of 1990s. In hindsight, box office success seems inevitable, but at time it was shock. Executives who doubted now celebrated, critics who dismissed now re-evaluated. Its journey mirrored Thelma and Louise's own, dismissed at first, underestimated, then defiant in survival. The filmmaking techniques and box office story intertwine. Techniques gave film mythic scale, box office gave it platform. Together, they transformed modest project into cultural milestone. It was not merely film that earned money, It was an event that carved itself into cultural consciousness. And like its heroines, it defied expectation. It refused to conform to Hollywood's formulas, yet triumphed anyway. Its filmmaking techniques created legend. Its box office proved hunger for rebellion. It endures not as curiosity but as testament. When art dares to leap, audiences will follow. Conclusions usually arrive to resolve, to stitch up loose ends and send us home with clarity. But the brilliance of this story is that it refuses neatness. It denies the tidy catharsis of happily ever after or justice served, and instead offers something bolder, an ending suspended between tragedy and liberation, an image frozen in time that insists we carry its ambiguity with us. To step into its conclusion is to feel both the ache of loss and the exaltation of freedom, to hold contradiction as truth. By the time the women reach the canyon's edge, we know there is no going back. They know it too. The road has narrowed, the police surround them, helicopters thrum above like vultures circling prey. They have fought, laughed, cried, and transformed. They have robbed and raged, danced and despaired. Their car, once vessel of escape, now sits poised at brink of impossible choice: surrender to system that never believed them, or define their ending themselves. What unfolds is not about winning or losing, it is about authorship. The final moments are quiet, stripped of spectacle. A detective, weary and desperate, pleads with them, his voice softened with empathy. For a second, it seems compromise might be possible. But the women's glances tell us otherwise. They share look that carries entire journey, every cigarette, every laugh, every tear, every mile. Their clasped hands seal covenant of friendship that has carried them this far. Without need for words, they agree, they will not be defined by anyone else's narrative. When Louise presses accelerator, car surges forward into sunlight. The screen freezes at moment of flight, car suspended over canyon, never falling, never crashing. This freeze frame transforms death into transcendence. Instead of watching destruction, we are left with eternal image of rebellion mid-leap. It is not annihilation but elevation, not finality but immortality. In that instant, they are no longer fugitives but legends, icons of refusal etched into cultural memory. The symbolism of this conclusion ripples outward. The canyon is abyss of patriarchy, of inevitability, of systems designed to swallow defiance. Their leap is refusal to be consumed. The freeze frame denies us satisfaction of closure, forcing us to live with ambiguity. Was it defeat? Was it victory? The answer is both, and neither. The ambiguity itself is statement. Freedom cannot be defined by neat binaries, rebellion cannot be reduced to win or loss. Critically, this ending divided audiences. Some saw tragedy, 2 women dead, their rebellion crushed. Others saw triumph, 2 women seizing authorship, choosing freedom on their own terms. The debate itself became part of legacy. The film demanded audiences wrestle with discomfort, confront assumptions, and accept contradiction. Its refusal to soften sparked outrage in some critics, celebration in others. That noise, that conversation, is itself the film's afterlife. Culturally, the ending redefined possibilities. Until then, few films allowed women to occupy mythic space of outlaw legend. The final leap placed them alongside Bonnie and Clyde, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, yet with twist. Where male outlaws were celebrated as rebels, these women were condemned, questioned, feared. And yet, in freeze frame, they transcended condemnation. Their leap became symbol of possibility, defiance, friendship, immortality. On personal level, conclusion lingers because it mirrors life itself. Few of us get neat resolutions, few stories end with clarity. More often, life ends mid-leap, suspended between hope and despair, victory and defeat. The film's ending captures that truth with poetic boldness. It does not give us comfort, it gives us honesty. And in honesty lies its power. The conclusion also mirrors production's own story. A script doubted, a project nearly abandoned, a film dismissed by executives leapt anyway, hurled itself into canyon of cultural debate. And like its heroines, it did not crash. It soared, suspended in legend, remembered not for what was lost but for what was seized. The film's ending is its own metaphor, leap into unknown that becomes immortality. For me, what lingers most is not the image of car, but the image of hands clasped. That gesture embodies everything: friendship that transcends categories, defiance that resists surrender, love that endures even in face of abyss. Their leap is not solitary but shared, reminding us rebellion is not only about freedom but about solidarity. They do not leap alone, they leap together. And so the conclusion leaves us suspended. We walk away with questions, with ache, with awe. We replay freeze frame in our minds, not as crash but as flight.